They say children born after midnight arrive quietly. No drums, no ululations, just a tired cry swallowed by the walls. Amara was born at 12:47 a.m. in a government hospital where hope lined up like patients, waiting, ignored. Her mother was 19. Her father was a name people stopped mentioning. No one held Amara up to the light and said, "She will change the world." The nurse wrapped her, placed her on a metal tray, and moved on. That was her first lesson. The world moves on quickly. Amara grew up in a single-room house where the walls sweated when it rained, where silence meant hunger and noise meant debt collectors. Her mother worked long hours selling clothes she didn't own, smiling at customers who never remembered her name. At night, when the power disappeared, Amara listened to the city breathe. Cars coughing, dogs arguing, men shouting promises they wouldn't keep. She learned early that dreams are loud during the day, but honest at night. By the age of 6, Amara understood something adults never taught her. Love is conditional. If you behave, you're loved. If you succeed, you're praised. If you fail, you disappear. At school, her uniform was always clean but never new. Shoes polished, soles thin like excuses. Teachers called her quiet. Classmates called her poor, without saying the word. She learned to lower her eyes, not because she was weak, but because observation is safer than attention. Her mother used to say, "Education is your way out." But nobody explained that education also teaches you where you belong. Amara watched girls with phones newer than their textbooks, boys who spoke English like passports. She watched the city reward confidence, even when it was fake. At home, her mother's back bent more every year. Dreams don't die loudly. They starve. When Amara turned 13, her mother stopped laughing. Not suddenly, just gradually, like a radio losing signal. Bills arrived. Neighbors whispered. The landlord knocked harder. Amara learned a second lesson. The city does not raise children. It tests them. By 16, Amara owned her first smartphone. Not bought. Given. A gift from a woman who smiled too much and asked too many questions. Pretty girls shouldn't struggle, she said. The phone opened doors. And mirrors. On the screen, Amara saw versions of herself that never existed. Filters smoother than reality. Lives edited into happiness. Likes felt like approval. Followers felt like belonging. No one told her that validation is addictive. At night, she stared at the ceiling and wondered, if the world only listens when you shine, what happens to those born in the dark? Her innocence didn't disappear. It negotiated. Compromises started small. Silence. Smiles. Being agreeable. Every choice felt temporary. Every consequence felt distant. That's how the city gets you. One evening, her mother collapsed. Not dramatically, just tired beyond repair. At the hospital, same walls, same smell, Amara realized something cruel and clear. She had inherited struggle like a surname. And for the first time, anger spoke louder than fear. Not rage. Resolve. She promised herself she would never beg the city again, even if it meant becoming something the city understands. Amara didn't know yet what she would lose. She only knew she was done being invisible. And somewhere between midnight and morning, the child the city didn't notice began learning how to make noise. Amara entered the second year of her teenage life with eyes wide, but lips sealed. The classroom smelled of chalk, sweat, and dust, the same smell that clung to forgotten dreams. She observed everything. The girls with braids shining like polished wood. The boys with new sneakers that whispered of privilege. Amara learned the first lesson: silence keeps you safe. Lunchtimes were merciless. Food was shared, but laughter excluded her. Teachers walked past without noticing the skinny girl with neat cornrows and patched shoes. Yet in this quiet, Amara became a watcher. Every whispered insult, every cruel joke, every sideways glance. A map of the human heart's dark geography. She began taking notes. Not in her books, but in her mind. Who to trust, who to fear, who to become. At home, her mother was slipping further into tiredness. The small one-room apartment grew colder. Bills piled up like silent accusations. Amara learned her second lesson: love doesn't protect you. Survival does. One day, a new girl arrived. She was everything Amara was not. Tall, bold, flawless skin, confidence radiating like a neon sign. The new girl smiled at the wrong people, laughed at the wrong jokes. And for a moment, Amara wanted to vanish. But she didn't. Instead, she folded herself into the shadows. A lesson in camouflage. Teachers, too, were human. The strict female teacher favored some girls, overlooked others. Amara noticed the patterns. She learned that obedience is currency in this world, and even merit doesn't always pay. At night, Amara walked the streets after school to help her mother sell clothes. The city whispered its temptations, phones flashing with filtered lives, men smiling too long, promises dangling like fruit she couldn't reach. Amara touched each temptation with a finger of curiosity and withdrew. But she learned that curiosity costs. Even observing without touching leaves marks. One afternoon, her uniform was torn during a fight over a trivial insult. Her shoes scuffed, her pride battered. Yet, in that embarrassment, Amara discovered something new. She could endure. She could survive humiliation and keep moving. And so she moved, silently, observing, calculating, waiting. She began noticing small advantages. Whose laughter could be borrowed, whose fears could be mirrored, which words could be whispered, and which truths hidden. By 16, she was no longer just a girl learning survival. She was a strategist, bending herself around the city's cruelty, slowly becoming what the city understood. And the city, as always, noticed, but not in a way that mattered. It merely watched. And Amara, walking home under the neon haze, whispered to herself,
"Silence is my shield. Observation, my weapon."
By the time smartphones became common, the city had already learned a new language. Not spoken, displayed. Screens replaced conversations. Filters replaced truth. The slim Nigerian teenage girl with deep brown skin entered this world carefully, like someone stepping into traffic without looking both ways. At 16, her phone became her window, not to freedom, but to comparison. On the screen, girls smiled without effort. Lives looked lighter, pain edited out. The quiet girl began to wonder if suffering was just bad branding. At school, popularity was no longer earned in classrooms. It was uploaded. Those with followers walked differently, spoke louder, breathed confidence. The observant girl learned another lesson. Attention is a form of currency, and like all currency, it could be traded. The stylish Nigerian woman with light brown skin appeared more often now, always polished, always smiling. She spoke in encouragements that sounded like rescue. People like you shouldn't struggle. Your face has potential. The words wrapped themselves around the girl's insecurities like silk. The phone began to change how the girl saw herself. Angles mattered. Lighting mattered. Silence mattered less than visibility. She posted cautiously. A photo here. A quote there. Each notification felt like proof of existence. At home, the one-room apartment felt smaller. Bills louder. Her mother's tiredness heavier. The girl scrolled while listening to her mother breathe unevenly in the dark. Guilt and ambition shared the same space. She promised herself this was temporary. It always starts that way. Soon, messages came. Compliments wrapped in curiosity. Opportunities with no details. She didn't answer most. But she read all. Reading is participation, whether you reply or not. The city watched quietly as she learned the rules. Don't show desperation. Don't explain your silence. Always look like you chose this. She curated herself carefully. A version of her that didn't ask for help. By 18, the girl was no longer invisible online. But offline, she felt thinner. Less real. The difference between who she was and who she showed the world began to stretch, slowly, dangerously. One night, under the glow of her phone, she whispered a truth she wouldn't post. The phone didn't answer, but the city already had.
If I disappear from this screen, would I still matter?
Love arrived quietly. Not like the movies. Not loud. Not dramatic. It arrived as attention. The slim Nigerian young woman with deep brown skin noticed it first in messages that asked how her day was going. In compliments that felt specific. Personal. For someone who had learned to survive on observation, being seen felt disarming. He didn't introduce himself as a savior. He didn't promise escape. He listened. And listening, she would later learn, is the most effective form of control. The city framed him well. Clean shoes. Confident posture. A voice that sounded like certainty. He spoke about ambition, about patience, about understanding how the world really works. Words that sounded like mentorship, but felt like affection. She told herself it wasn't love, just conversation, just connection. But connection, when you've lived unseen, becomes oxygen. He never rushed her, never raised his voice. He waited, and waiting creates trust. He offered small things: meals, transport, advice, nothing that looked like ownership, everything that felt like care. At home, her mother asked questions without accusation. The young woman answered carefully. Silence, she had learned, protects fragile arrangements. Soon, she began measuring herself through his reactions. What pleased him? What bored him? What disappointed him? She adjusted, not because he asked, but because she wanted to. That was the moment she stopped being free. He never demanded. He suggested. People will judge you. Be careful what you post. Not everyone wants the best for you. Protection disguised as concern. And concern feels a lot like love, until it doesn't. The city approved. She looked better, moved differently, spoke less. People assumed she was happy. Happiness is easy to imitate. One evening, after a long silence, he withdrew. No messages, no calls. The quiet became unbearable. She realized the truth too late. Love that must be earned can always be taken away. That night, she stared at her reflection and asked herself a question she was afraid to answer. Was this still her life, or had it quietly become payment? The city didn't respond. It never does. The city didn't take everything at once. It never does. It takes in pieces. So small, you convince yourself you won't miss them. The slim Nigerian young woman with deep brown skin woke up one morning feeling older than her age. Not tired. Hollow. The phone beside her was silent. Not broken. Just uninterested. Outside, the city moved as usual. Buses argued with traffic. Vendors shouted survival into the air. Nothing had happened to the city. Something had happened to her. The well-dressed Nigerian man didn't disappear dramatically. No confrontation. No goodbye. Just distance. Calculated. Clean. Affection, she learned, doesn't end loudly when it was never honest. At home, her mother's health declined without warning. Or maybe the warning signs had always been there. Hospital corridors smelled the same as years ago. Paint peeling. Time looping. Some places remember you. Bills stacked up again. The ceiling leaked again. Fear returned like an old landlord who never moved out. Progress, she realized, can be reversed quietly. She replayed every choice. Every silence. Every compromise she called temporary. Not to punish herself, but to understand where she lost control. Friends grew distant. Not cruel. Just unavailable. People respect success. They retreat from collapse. The city has no loyalty. One night, power went out. Darkness filled the room. Without screens, without distractions, the truth arrived unfiltered. She had outsourced her stability. And when it was withdrawn, nothing held. She cried without drama. No audience. No posts. Just grief for the girl she used to be. The one who still believed endurance was enough. By morning, something hardened inside her. Not hope. Clarity. The city had taken something precious. But it had also revealed something dangerous. She would never be unprepared again. Anger didn't arrive screaming. It arrived organized. The slim Nigerian young woman with deep brown skin woke up one morning without tears left to cry. What remained was focus. Pain had finally finished teaching. She stopped explaining herself. Stopped apologizing for silence. Stopped asking permission to exist. The city noticed the change before she did. Anger sharpened her memory. She remembered every pattern she had studied. Every rule she had memorized quietly. This time, she wasn't observing to survive. She was observing to control outcomes. She began working again. Not desperately. Deliberately. Small jobs. Digital work. Tasks that didn't require trust. Only results. Independence doesn't arrive loudly. It accumulates. She changed how she dressed. Nothing flashy. Nothing apologetic. Clean lines. Neutral colors. Clothes that said I am not asking. Men spoke. She listened. Not with hope. With analysis. She learned the difference between interest and leverage. And once you learn it, you can't unlearn it. At home, her mother noticed the quiet shift. Not happiness. Stability. Food returned to the house. Bills were paid on time. Love grew less anxious. The city tried to test her again. Temptations returned, subtler now. Shortcuts, promises, easy answers. She declined calmly. Power, she learned, is the ability to say no without explanation. At night, she walked through familiar streets differently. Not smaller, straighter. Anger had taught her posture. She understood something dangerous. The city respects boundaries more than innocence. And she was done being innocent. Success arrived without celebration. No applause. No relief. Just movement. The slim Nigerian young woman with deep brown skin woke up in a better room than before. Cleaner walls. Stronger locks. But the silence felt the same. Money solved problems quickly. Rent stopped chasing her. Bills stopped shouting. Hunger left the house. But peace did not move in. She dressed better now. Not extravagantly. Efficiently. Clothes chosen for confidence, not attention. People treated her differently. Respect often arrives late and conditional. Her phone rang more often. Opportunities. Invitations. Reconnections from people who had once been unavailable. She answered selectively. Attention no longer impressed her. At work, she delivered results. No excuses. No emotional attachments. She became reliable. And reliability is mistaken for strength until it isn't. Her mother smiled more these days. Laughed softly. That mattered. Yet even joy felt measured, like something that might be withdrawn again. At night, she sat alone in well-lit rooms scrolling past lives that looked happier than hers. Comparison hadn't disappeared. It had simply changed costumes. She noticed something unsettling. The higher she climbed, the fewer people spoke honestly to her. Success attracts silence dressed as respect. One evening, standing by a window overlooking the city, she realized. She had escaped survival mode. But she had not entered peace. The city had kept its promise. It rewarded her discipline. It just never promised healing. At some point, the slim Nigerian young woman with deep brown skin stopped asking why the city behaved the way it did. She started asking a more dangerous question. What does the city see when it looks at me? People approached her differently now. Not with pity, not with dismissal, with caution. She had learned the language of confidence. Not the loud kind, but the steady kind that doesn't explain itself. She listened more than she spoke. Not because she was unsure, but because people reveal themselves when they think you're not judging. The city talked freely around her, and it did not like what it heard. Men tested boundaries disguised as jokes. Women measured themselves quietly in her presence. Opportunities arrived wrapped in moral shortcuts. She didn't react. She reflected. She gave people exactly what they gave her. Nothing more. Nothing less. Kindness met kindness. Manipulation met distance. Disrespect met silence. The city began to recognize its own behavior. Some called her cold. Others called her intimidating. She accepted both. A mirror is never accused of lying, only of being uncomfortable. At work, she refused shortcuts that compromised her values. In relationships, she demanded clarity without begging for it. This made her inconvenient. Inconvenience is a form of power. She noticed how quickly admiration turned to resentment when she stopped being accessible. The city prefers women who are impressive, but available. She was no longer either. One evening, walking past familiar streets, she saw younger girls repeating patterns she had escaped. Smiling carefully, listening too politely, hoping attention would turn into safety. The mirror hurt. That night, she understood her final role. She was not here to save the city. She was here to show it itself. The slim Nigerian young woman with deep brown skin stopped pretending the city's rules didn't matter. She began to speak. Not to be heard, not to be understood, but to reveal. She told friends what she had endured silently. Not in detail, not in accusation. Just the shape of compromise. The shadow of survival. The room shifted uncomfortably. People realized the distance between appearance and reality. She told mentors, too. The ones who had once guided her. Sometimes kindly, sometimes selfishly. She described their influence without bitterness. She described the lessons. The city, she realized, had prepared her for this moment. To speak truth with precision. To measure the impact. To see reactions unfiltered. Some laughed. Some denied. Some avoided her entirely. She did not seek agreement. The mirror had been lifted. Reflections are never comfortable. She confessed to herself, too, all the compromises she had made. All the moments she had allowed attention to become currency. She accepted them, not proudly, not with shame, simply as coordinates in a map of survival. One evening, she walked through a crowded street with her head high. Whispers followed. People noticed her, not because she demanded it, but because she existed deliberately. Power, she learned, is exposure without apology. At home, her mother asked questions about her choices. Answers were clear and measured. Nothing exaggerated. Nothing hidden. The older woman nodded slowly. Recognition passed between them. The city continued. Life continued. Chaos persisted. But she no longer belonged to it blindly. She belonged to herself. And in that quiet ownership, she understood. Truth, even when unwelcome, carries its own gravity. The slim Nigerian woman with deep brown skin walked through the city she had learned to read. Every street corner whispered her past. Every shadow carried a lesson. Every neon sign reflected not just light, but memory. She realized that survival, power, and truth leave marks. Marks she could feel, but others could only guess. Her story was written in subtle actions. A look that made someone pause. A refusal that reshaped expectation. A calm presence that revealed hidden truths. The city had shaped her, and she had shaped it back. She walked past younger girls learning the same lessons she had learned the hard way. Some smiled cautiously. Some paused, curious. Some ignored her entirely. Her influence was silent. Her legacy was invisible, but unmistakable. Money, power, and respect had arrived. But she measured them differently now. Not by admiration. Not by followers. Not by how many doors opened. She measured them by freedom. Freedom to act. Freedom to observe. Freedom to be unafraid. She visited her mother quietly. The older woman, stronger now, smiled without expectation. The young woman saw herself reflected in her mother. Resilient, measured, enduring. Generations, she realized, are shaped not only by fortune, but by lessons survived. The city tried to tempt her one last time. Shortcuts, recognition, gilded promises. She smiled inwardly. The lessons were too deep. She declined calmly, without spectacle. At night, standing on a rooftop, she looked over the glowing city. The wind tugged at her cornrows. Her eyes traced every street, every alley, every neon blur. She understood now. She was a shadow in the city's memory, a shadow that would linger longer than the loudest voices. She realized that legacy is quiet. It does not need applause. It does not bend to perception. It is carried in the way the city moves when you step aside, in the pauses of life that others do not notice, but feel. In that quiet understanding, she finally smiled. Not for the world, not for herself, but for the journey, every shadow, every lesson, every silence. And the city watched. It always does. And for once, it recognized what it could not take and could not undo.